You're listening to Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation podcast that aims to discuss issues and efforts related to the Muley Fanatic Foundation mission, the conservation of mule deer, furthering the sport of hunting, and sound wildlife management.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley fanatic.
It's time for Wild Things and Wild Places. And here's your guide, Joshua Coursey.
And welcome to Wild Things and Wild Places. Joining me today, Joe Hickey from Lone Tree, Wyoming, also representing the South West Wyoming Feral Horse Association. Joe, glad to have you on today.
It's such a treat to be here and have the opportunity to talk to you about this horse problem. Yes, it is.
Yeah, but you got a solution, and that solution has actually worked. You know, we've had some other podcasts where we've talked about the problem with feral horses here within the last few months, actually a couple of different occasions. And the problem that we've continued to run into, our chapters, of course, we have a chapter in the Sierra Front chapter in Reno, Nevada, who's living in the epicenter of the problem with feral horses. Everybody's hands are always tied, or everybody runs into an obstacle or a reason nothing can be done, or the buck just gets continued to be passed. But the Southwest Wyoming Feral Horse Association, you figured something out. You found something and you made it work.
We did. We recognized the problem and how bad it could be in the future and how hard it was on wildlife going to be. There was nearly 1,000 head of horses in this area, and they multiply about 25% a year. So in a few years, it had been totally out of control. And these feral horses, they are horses that somebody's turned loose, and they're not related to the wild horse, even though sometimes it's referred to as that. Horses it seems like in Wyoming especially, they can multiply fast on the range, and it's so hard on the range, on the wildlife, on grazing. It was so important that we done something about this before it got out of control.
Let's talk about that, Joe. How, one, the recognition of everything you've just laid out is exactly what I believe many feel is the problem. There is a sense of not only their impact, but you couple that with the lack of management or the ability to manage that, and that's where the frustration really starts to take hold and starts to brew. But when you had this idea of wanting to be able to have an action that would remove them from the landscape, others have had that idea. To no avail. But tell me about the process, because obviously at some point you had communications with BLM.
We did, and the BLM were the first ones to recognize these were not wild horses. They were horses that had been turned out and just got out of control or escaped from sheep herders. That happens occasionally. As they produce, it's just anything. It's a sad fate. Eventually, they starve to death or destroy the habitat, and that's just nature. Management needs to be done on everything, whether it's deer, elk, whatever we have.
Wolves, grizzlies, you name it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So when you went to BLM, you apparently made the case to tell them that these are not wild horses, these are feral horses. And they just took you for your word?
Oh, no.
I didn't think so.
No, they'd been recognizing the problem for quite some time. And everybody loves a horse, but when they become out of control, they're in charge of a resource. And that resource gets not just damaged, it gets completely ruined as these problems, if they're not dealt with.
Decimated.
Total decimation. It's happened in many areas where people have fought against any management at all. It's wiped out whole herds of big game animals, because the horse is the dominant one out there. It's so important to just, everything needs to be brought into check. This is just one way we had an opportunity to do.
Yeah, so I want to talk about and get into the details of the process. Of course, this didn't happen overnight. There was a lot of planning, a lot of information sharing, a lot of education that had to take place. Some maps had to be shown. Total area that this problem that you had identified, what was a total landscape area that it encompassed? Do you have an estimate on that?
No, we don't, but it's possibly, where we run our cattle is 160 sections.
Okay, so a good chunk of ground.
Yes.
And it's not, was it all this private ground, or was there some public land involved in this as well?
Most of it's public ground.
That's right, most of it.
And
that's important. I think that's very important.
The only real private ground was the checkerboard. and that's owned by Uinta Development and Sweetwater Royalties.
Okay, so most of this area, if someone's not familiar with exactly where we're talking about, if you could look in Southwest Wyoming towards Cedar Mountain, Black Mountain, that's the landscape that we're referring to.
Yes, very rough landscape. Great mule deer habitat.
Yeah. Water's a premium in that land.
Yes, it is. I've got to commend the BLM. They have been on top of it and help the permittees pay for it and do the work. But we've done lots of water development, pipelines to troughs. That helps out to say they're all sage grouse friendly. Really got to commend the BLM. They've done a great job helping.
Yeah, their hands are tied too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So you identify this landscape, you visit with the BLM. Of course, other stakeholders in the area, they're aware of the problem. They recognize that if we don't get a handle on this, it's going to continue to get a lot worse and have a lot more decimation to the landscape, to maybe even a point of no return.
Absolutely. And another thing, that is it's hard for the horse.
It is.
They die a horrible death when it comes to starvation or choking to death. And that happens in California. They'll eat each other's manes and tails. Finally, they run out of water in the water holes, which are limited, and they'll drink the mud. Terrible way to die.
Terrible way. So you get an estimate of what you think might be a head count, if you will, on the number of horses within this landscape.
I think there was nearly 1,000, which we felt like we had flown it twice and counted them, that there was around 650 to 750. So that's how far off we were. It would have became a problem that would have been so expensive to fix, you couldn't do it.
So with that data, that information, you go back to the BLM, you go to the state. You had to go to someone to be able to get the approval to, take matters into your own hands. And I guess it's probably the right time to talk about the process of removing them before we get to how many were removed, because I think we got to save that. That's a good teaser.
That's a good point, and I'm so proud of that operation that we hired a contractor, and that's all they do for a living. They've done it for 60 years. It's a family from Utah, but they grew up in Craig and Maybell, and that's all they've done all their lives. They own all the equipment. They hire all the people, and many of those, they brought in 2 helicopters. They were Hughes jet helicopters. And they brought some of those horses in several hours. They just are so knowledgeable of the animal, they just bring it in on a trot for 10, 12 miles. They get to the corral and wouldn't even be in a sweat. And it's so amazing to see. They bring them into the corral, run them down the alley, separate the colts, the mares and the studs, so nobody gets hurt. It's just an amazing process. One day they got 300.
Yeah. And we might as well let it out, Joe. This even surprised you.
Oh, it even surprised them.
Total amount removed.
933.
933 feral horses.
Yes.
Wow. When you think about that's an immediate impact to the landscape that you can quantify day one.
The sheep are out there 6 months a year. That's 6 animal units per month. An animal unit per month is what one animal will eat in a month. So I guess I should speak more in the terms of cattle. That's what I'm more familiar with. So one cow what they'll eat in a month. Our cattle are out there 5 months.
Okay.
So they eat 5 AUMs each. A horse eats 12
each.
Because they're there year round.
Right.
And again, I have such a soft spot in my heart for those horses. But to save an animal from an agonizing death is so important. These horses went to New Mexico on pasture.
That's what I was just going to ask you. What was the process from once they were captured, loaded up?
They were separated. They were loaded on semi-trailers that are specifically designed to haul horses. They're not double-decked or anything. It's straight decks. They're loaded light. That means that you don't just stuff them in there. And they said that when they unloaded them in New Mexico, that they reached there healthy, no problems.
Okay. At some point in this early process, we may have got ahead of ourselves a little bit, but you had to come up with a cost estimate. You weren't looking to just remove a portion. You were looking to do what you could to remove the problem, which required you trying to remove as many as you could. So that number, you'd said you had flown twice. You were working with an estimate probably somewhere around 700, I'm guessing.
Yes.
And so this company out of Utah, they were able to help you go through that process to understand, this is what it's going to cost, Joe, if you want to get this done and done right.
We put it out for bid.
Okay.
There were several that bid, and these folks, where they have done it so much for so many years, I think in their career they've gathered 400,000 or 500,000 horses.
Wow.
And they care about the horse also.
Sure.
And so they put in a bid by the head. A cost it was to crell them and sort them and load them.
Sir, I'm curious, at some point when you got that initial estimate, and do you mind sharing what that total was?
$292 per head.
$292 per head.
And then we had to pay for a health inspection. A veterinarian was there to inspect every horse, and a brand inspection. So if there were any that were branded, we'd have to find the owners, but we found none. They were all had been turned loose and probably out there for generations. It went very well.
So bottom line is you're talking almost $250,000.
Absolutely. It was more than that, actually.
Yeah. But you were working with 700 as an estimate.
Yeah.
When you get 933, all of a sudden the price just keeps going up.
Yeah, to use an old term, we broke the bank.
But you couldn't
we're
stop.
struggling.
You weren't telling the contractor, hey, our budget was 700. Stop.
Well, no, we did not. Deal was his complete removal. And where they've done that in the past, it's held for some places 50, 60 years. And also probably nearly half until we got more than we realized were the permittees out there. They all put in a share according to the AUMs they ran out there. And this is so commendable to me. Some of those folks have owned them not very long, 5 to 10 years, have never turned a cow or a sheep out there and still paid their share.
Just recognizing the importance of the effort.
Of the effort, yes. Yeah. And another thing that I felt was quite commendable, of course, there was 3 areas we worked. The Uinta Development Area, which is checkerboard, the Sage Creek Mountain allotment, and the Cedar Mountain allotment. And some of those allotments only had 20 or 30 horses, but they paid the same as an allotment with several hundred.
Wow.
The same per share, and were happy to.
Yeah, that's commendable.
To take care of their neighbors.
That's commendable. Absolutely it is.
I'm so impressed with the agriculture community that stepped forward and done that.
At some point, Joe, knowing you were going to need, this was going to be a big ticket item, you had a pretty good estimate going into this. Of course, it exceeded that as we've talked about, but you knew it was going to take some partnership. There was many stakeholders involved. At some point, you reached out to us, and I'm just curious where that thought process started. What made you call me directly and ask for us to contribute to this? Of course, we were very supportive of it, wanted to, but I'm curious how you put it together that we might want to be a partner in this.
That's a good question, because I've known your organization and admired it and how it's been run probably since you've started. And I've known you for a long time, and I know the integrity of this group. It was suggested by some state agencies that we reach out to the wildlife people.
Okay.
And I was very hesitant to call, and I probably wouldn't have if I hadn't known you personally. And I could take rejection.
Yeah.
From somebody I knew better than somebody I didn't. You folks stepped up, and I must say, other than a complete stakeholder, you guys are the top of the list. And we so appreciate that. The grazing board has helped us from both Sweetwater and Uinta County. Of course, Sweetwater Royalties was a big landowner out there, recognized what it was going to happen to them, and they really stepped up. But again, the permittees, who sometimes they get the bad reputation of not caring about the land, but they're the ones that pay for the water improvements. And in this project, they paid over $100,000.
Wow.
That's pretty tough. Some of those folks, their wife works at the lunchroom at school, and they have a couple of jobs to make it work, and they still stepped up.
I think that's really a testament to how serious of a problem this is, and the recognition that if you don't do something, how much more serious it'll get.
That's the problem, is we didn't know this going in, but in just a couple of years, it would have been way over $500,000 out of our, and that would have made it out of our reach.
Right.
Besides the resource being destroyed.
I mean, we had great moisture last year. That part of the country had good moisture. But you look at the index or the trends prior to that, when you couple that type of AUMs and drought, I mean, it's a recipe for disaster.
It truly is. We look at this RMP in southwestern Wyoming and see what something like that is going to do to our economy. This is the same thing. If that had been left unchecked, uncontrolled, it would have been a great destruction on our economy. And you drive out there and see nothing but dust bowls.
Yeah, when you talk about eating yourself out of house and home, this is it.
This is it.
Joe, I'm curious. Your family is a storied family of the area that goes back prior to statehood. What'd you say, 1874?
Yes.
Yeah. Hickey Mountain?
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
My great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather, okay.
He ran cattle up there, and they just got saying that mountain where Hickey runs his cattle, and that's how it got its name clear back in the 1880s.
Wow. So my point being is citizen science is very important in our mind as an organization. We recognize the value that folks that have lived on particular landscapes for generations. They know it better than anybody else. And I truly mean anybody. They have an intimate relationship with that land. I'm curious, knowing that this effort here certainly has a benefit beyond grazing of cattle or sheep, but also all species of wildlife, particularly to deer, though. You have seen some changes in your country in regards to deer. Deer, it's no secret, deer are declining all across the West. Wyoming isn't immune to any other effort that's being out there. We're all seeing this. It's a trend that's been going on for decades, but particularly in the landscape where you live, where your family has had strong roots that exceed our statehood of 1890. But what have you seen in just the last 4 or 5 decades with deer, Joe?
When I was a boy, of course, the hunting was spectacular in the 50s and 60s. But what's changed is we stopped using some predator practices. I went from maybe seeing 2 or 3 coyotes the first 10 years of my life to seeing one every day. And the deer are the ones that have really suffered from, again, management of some species. Now, we can't control the weather, but there are many things we can control. Predator control's one. Habitat's another one. And we've done a great service to the habitat with gathering these feral horses. I'm so thankful. The fishing, game and fish, they don't like to be called fish and game in Wyoming.
Yeah, that's funny how that works.
But my grandpa always called them that.
Yeah.
But the game and fish, they have changed in the last 20 years. They would just dictate, but now they go to the public. And like you said, the public that are out there, even though they're out there every day, their input is so important. And things have changed in 20 years, in my opinion. They have a different process of making decisions, and it's become much better. I can't praise the game of fish enough in our area. Maybe it's the people, the game warden we have now. We've had game wardens in the past who was just there as a stepping stone to go to Cody or
move on.
Or Jackson. But Alan DeRue, he is part of our community. The action is so much faster because they understand so much more than guys that are just transferred out. And they're doing a great job. And sometimes their hands are tied too, just like the BLMs.
Sure.
I know they have a great concern. Sometimes there can be too many elk.
I was going to ask you that. You mentioned that as a boy you might see a coyote every so many years, and now you're seeing one every day. But when you think back to those days, when we're just a young lad, what type of observation did you have of elk at that time? Because that's changed drastically in your lifetime, I'm assuming.
I can remember right now in my mind's eye the first elk I ever seen.
Yeah, how old were you?
I was probably 14.
Okay.
And then lived in elk country all the time, and now It's not uncommon to have 500 head come through. And
That's a big change.
it's a big change. And but there again, they've done a lot through seasons to disperse them. They give us fencing supplies to keep them off the haystacks. And the Game and Fish Department I think they're doing a good job, and it's a tough job.
It's a tough job. Yeah, especially when you talk about mule deer and the conservation of mule deer. There's no silver bullet. There are multiple things that are impacting deer, from disease to predators to competition with more dominant species on the landscape. And if it was just a quick fix, it would have been done a long time ago. But when you look at these problems like feral horses that just grow and get out of control, you look at the increase in the numbers of elk and all of these mouths on the landscape, it's no wonder why deer they're taking it on the chin.
And another thing that has changed in our area is our BLM. We are working better with the BLM than we ever have in my life.
Really? And what do you attribute that to, Joe?
I think they recognize the advantage of, instead of dictating comments, knowing that we care as much about resources as anybody. And we've had a couple of good years. But the year before that was a tough drought year.
Right.
One of the toughest we've had. I can't get over how the range has improved. And you go out there, we don't move by the calendar anymore, our cattle. We move by utilization. And I'm president of the Sage Creek Mountain Grazing Association. And I'll call up our BLM people. I'll say, we feel like our utilization we've used maybe 40%, 30%. We feel like it's time to move. They'll say, open the gates to the next pasture. And instead of driving 500 or 600 head through a gate, like we used to do, they drift for a week or 10 days. You have way less orphan calves. They go through 6, 7, 8 at a time. And before, they wouldn't let you do that with 2 pastures. You had to clean one and have everything in the other one. And it's amazing what the grass is. Now, we all know that deer and cows really aren't in competition with each other until you eat it to the dirt. And then they are.
And everything is.
Everything is. And that's totally in the past.
Let me ask you, speaking of grasses, Joe, we've had a lot of conversation. Our own director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department has called it or referred to it as the cancer of Wyoming. Cheatgrass is very real, and it does have an impact on the landscape. What is your observation in your country of cheatgrass? What does that look like?
Fortunately, I've been out there with folks that study it, and we try to, when we move cattle, have folks that come along that help us that are experts on grass. And that's another interesting thing, is if you let a cow just eat 30%, they eat the best. Those seeds go through. And I have noticed how the best grass has increased and the other not so desirable, noxious weeds, poisonous plants have decreased. Now, you starve a cow long enough, they're going to eat local weed.
Sure.
But if it can't seed and get spread around, it dies out. As far as the cheatgrass, that comes more from fire and overgrazing, and we've had neither. So we have been very lucky to not have it spread in our area.
Yeah, you have been, because you're right. Disturbance, it thrives.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's along the roads. And that's another thing scary about the MRP is they're going to really cut back on chemical control of noxious weeds. And we, every year along our roads, have the weed and pest go along them and
manage it.
Joe,
it's been a pleasure to talk to you about so many wonderful things in regards to habitat. Really, if you were to put all of this if you had to put it into a paragraph, it would be, this is an effort for improving our habitat. And so much of what we talk about with mule deer conservation, that's its ground zero. That's the epicenter of where the effort needs to start. Is a healthy habitat will certainly provide and make an opportunity for a sustainable, healthy herd. But the efforts that you have taken with the Southwest Wyoming Feral Horse Association tremendous. I commend you. We were glad for the phone call. We were glad to contribute to this. The effort it's profound, and the impact is going to make an immediate difference for the landscape and for the critters that live in that landscape. Job well done, sir.
Thank you so much. And the way it turned out, we were thinking of, if we only got 600 and some, that we maybe would say you guys could spend your money better. But you have really saved this project.
Well, thanks for that.
And really, we can't spend money better than protecting our resource.
That's right.
And so many folks feel like the best way to protect it is do nothing. That's not true.
Yeah.
The cheapest and best way is to use common sense.
And when you called me and asked about this, when we have a financial request like that, that's what has to go through my mind is this is an investment. This is an investment of my personal dollars. This is an investment of our organizational dollars that represents many. And can I stand before those folks and know that we made a fiscally responsible decision to allocate their dollars to something that is worthwhile and difference-making? And this met that criteria right out of the gate. I knew it immediately because so many of the efforts regarding feral horses aren't pursued, or you run into those opportunities where it's not an option. There's things that prevent it. And to me, it seemed like you just found that right little loophole. I think earlier you had told me that, what was the cliche you referenced with the hummingbird? I should have wrote it down because that's a good one.
There is a hole that only a hummingbird can fly through.
Boy, and you nailed it. You did.
That's so true. Our permits were only till the end of this year, which is a few days away.
Yeah, I'm curious, how much time was involved in the gathering from start to finish?
About 10 days.
10 days, okay.
But just think, we organized over a year ago. We recognized the problem. Then we first, of course, talked to the BLM first. They'd already said that they weren't wild horses. They were feral horses and just turned loose and multiplied. And then, of course, we went to the state grazing board, the governor's office. Another great help was the livestock board.
Yeah, truly the way we do business in Wyoming, right?
Right. You go to the people, and then we all helped each other.
That's right. Joe, do you have a concern, or is there some reservations about this landscape over a period of time? I know you talked about some of the success where they have had in prior work and efforts like this, where you can keep these horses out of those landscapes for decades, but we have a problem. Do you anticipate seeing that you're going to have to maybe go back to the drawing board and do this again 10 years from now?
We hope not. And two examples. Back in late 40s, 50s, right in that time, over by Carter, and 60s, they gathered them all, and they're still all gone.
They're still gone.
Between Carter and Kemmer.
Yeah.
Same way north of the interstate towards Fontenelle. There aren't any there. They gathered them. And this Green River is a great separation from us and the Red Desert.
Boy, it is.
Yeah,
you talk about a barrier. It's like I-80.
Yes,
it's clear.
And to give you an idea, we haven't talked about, I didn't explain it very well, the area was south of the I-80 to the Utah line, east of 414, Lyman and Mountain View, and west of the Flaming Gorge or Green River. That's a lot of country.
That's a big landscape right there.
And several times we'd go, somebody'd say there's 20 or 30 over here, over by Church Beach gas plant, 20 or 30. We went for cleanup, got 150.
What's the estimate that the contractor gave you of what still remains?
Very few.
Very few. Okay.
Very few.
Wonderful. Again, my hat's off to you, Joe. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for the effort in organizing this. Thank you for letting us be a part of it. It's a difference-making measure, and that's ultimately our goal. That's our charge. Joe Hickey, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to your organization and all the people in it. You guys are doing a good job. An important work is being done right here in our area and wherever your chapters are.
Thank you very much. Joe Hickey with the South West Wyoming Feral Horse Association. I challenge you to share this podcast with someone that isn't maybe familiar with the process or the problem associated with feral horses and horses that are unmanaged and the impact that they have to a very important landscape habitat for not only our domestic stock, but also our most cherished wildlife resources and how important this is. Please share this with someone. We all love horses. We do. There's no doubt about that. It's the management and when they get out of control that becomes the problem and how to deal with that. And here was a solution that certainly is going to work and can be measured to be a success immediately. Joe Hickey, South West Wyoming Feral Horse Association. Glad to have him on today.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a muley fanatic.